Hiking and camping in the forest are often imagined as peaceful escapes into nature, places where people can find quiet, fresh air, and freedom from the noise of civilization. But in the deep woods, far from the comfort of streetlights and neighbors, strange things can happen that leave people shaken for life, like the story of Trevor, an experienced hiker who decided to spend a weekend alone in a national forest, setting up camp several miles from the nearest trailhead, the kind of place where silence is absolute and darkness feels heavier than anywhere else. And as he cooked dinner by the fire, the first night he noticed what he thought were animal eyes reflecting back at him from the tree line. Too high off the ground to be a deer, and too far apart to be anything he recognized, yet when he shined his flashlight toward them there was nothing there, only empty woods, though every few minutes the glinting eyes would reappear in a slightly different spot closer, and by midnight he could hear soft footsteps circling just beyond the glow of the fire, crunching lightly on leaves, moving with deliberate slowness as if pacing. And when he finally shouted into the dark, demanding whoever it was to show themselves, the sound stopped, leaving an oppressive silence that felt worse than the footsteps themselves. And he sat frozen until morning, where he discovered huge prints around his camp that looked vaguely human, but much wider, leading back into the dense forest. And though Trevor tried to rationalize it as a prank, he admitted to friends afterward that he felt watched the entire hike back, and he has never camped alone again. Another story comes from a group of college friends, Lena, Josh, and Mark, who went on a weekend camping trip in the Appalachian Mountains, setting up near a remote creek where they fished, cooked, and laughed until night fell. And as they sat around the fire trading stories, they began to hear faint voices in the distance, at first like echoes bouncing through the valleys. But the voices grew clearer, sounding like a group of people talking and laughing, except the words weren't in any language they could understand, just garbled sounds like a recording being played backward. And curious but unsettled Josh shouted a greeting into the night, only for the forest to go completely silent in an instant. No crickets, no rustling leaves, nothing but the hiss of the fire. And then, without warning, a loud scream rang out from the woods, high-pitched and drawn out, followed by what sounded like heavy, frantic running toward their camp. And the three scrambled into their tent, clutching a hatchet and flashlight as something massive crashed through the brush, circling them at terrifying speed, brushing against the fabric of the tent at one point as though dragging a hand along it, before vanishing as suddenly as it came. And the friends spent the rest of the night wide-eyed, jumping at every sound until sunrise, when they found no tracks, no broken branches, nothing to suggest anything had been there. And to this day, each of them swears they all heard the voices and the scream exactly as it happened, proof that it wasn't just imagination. The third story belongs to a man named Henry, who loved solo camping and often ventured into forests across the Pacific Northwest. But one summer night, after hiking deep into an unfamiliar area, he woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of someone or something whistling a tune just outside his tent, slow and deliberate, the same 4 notes repeated over and over. And terrified, he lay perfectly still, hoping it was another camper. But the forest had been empty all day, and no one else should have been miles from the trail. And the whistling grew louder, as though the figure was circling his campsite, until suddenly it stopped right outside the tent door, replaced by slow breathing, deep and ragged. And Henry's hand shook so badly on his knife that he thought he might drop it. But he never dared move or unzip the flap, lying there in near paralysis until dawn finally came. And when he finally crawled out, he found a small pile of stones stacked carefully, just a few feet from his tent, something that hadn't been there the night before, arranged in a way that felt purposeful, almost like a warning. And Henry packed up in record time and hiked the entire day without rest until he reached his car, later admitting that what chilled him most wasn't the whistling itself, but the realization that whoever was out there had managed to move silently enough to build the rock pile without waking him until they chose to start whistling. These three stories, Trevor's encounter with the glowing eyes, and inhuman prints circling his campsite, Lena and her friend's night of garbled voices and screams in the Appalachian woods, and Henry's terrifying experience with the midnight whistler leaving stone markers, show that in the forest, where isolation meets the unknown, the line between natural and unnatural blurs quickly. And what begins as a night of adventure can easily turn into something that scars people forever. Because deep in the woods, there are no neighbors to call, no streetlights to chase away shadows, only endless dark and the unsettling truth that sometimes you are not as alone as you think. And whatever else might share that darkness with you may not want to be found, but it certainly wants you to know it is there.